great pleasure to have you all on board today. Just to give you some sort of operating instructions, if you want to ask some questions as we go through this, there's a little Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen, and all you need to do is pop some questions through there, and that will get some questions through to my faithful producer here, Michael Henley, who you can see his hand there. That's about all. But Mike is running the ship for us with respect to questions, and so he'll point me in the right direction once we get the questions coming up. So yeah, again, welcome everybody. It's great to be able to be with you to talk about one of my favourite properties in the wine world. Actually, first managed to visit Pyrmaid Valley in 2007, just after Mike and Claudia had started producing the first wines off the property. And so it was great to be on that property with Mike and Claudia, see what they'd done. It's an amazing property inland from Waipara on the way to Hanmer Springs. For those of us who have been brought up in Canterbury and spent plenty of times as a kid heading up to the hot springs, you head through the gorge into Waikari, and then the little township of Waikari. About 5 kilometres from there inland is these amazing limestone clay soils that you find only in this part of New Zealand. Bell Hill and Pyrmaid Valley share those soils, and very, very hard to find elsewhere, and probably as close as you can get to the wines, the soils of Burgundy, outside Burgundy. So Mike was certainly passionate about that, spent about 10 years looking for the property, and when he found it, he knew he'd found a special place for him and Claudia to plant Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So in this property, it is actually an ancient meeting place of 4 fault lines, and also was an ancient lake bed in early days. And so the soils here are, as I've said, very different from what you find elsewhere. And it's this melding of limestone and clay on these high Appellation. Oh, we got someone from Singapore, which is fantastic.
Stop reading.
Yeah, I can't help myself. Yeah, I'm not able to be produced. I just got to roll with it. But these soils at amazing altitude. So you're talking altitude of around a bit over 1,000 feet. So it's a very high vineyard for New Zealand. And by being inland, it means you're away from the cool sea breeze. So you have these shorter seasons that you would normally have, but the combination of the altitude, the sort of bright, bristling sunshine of North Canterbury, the windiness of the place, which means that from a disease point of view, is sort of the vines have got to sort of work as hard as they can to grow enough. And so you always end up with these moderate crops of really quite small berry grapes that are intensely flavoursome. And of course, when you grow Chardonnay and Pinot Noir on limestone, you end up with something very, very special. Mike and Claudia set about planting that property to 4 parcels of grapes, 2 parcels of Pinot Noir, 2 parcels of Chardonnay. The Chardonnay parcels, actually every one of the parcels was named after the weed that they found growing in that part of the property, which has been a property that's never had any pesticide or artificial fertilizer on it. It's sort of in its natural state. So you see these amazing differences in aspect in the way that the plants respond to them in a very short space. So that's why you have earth smoke and angel flower for Pinot, because that's the name of the plants that were there. And of course, lion's tooth is dandelion. So that was a great name also for Chardonnay. And field of fire, which is actually couch grass. And it's called field of fire because when you see the couch grass growing, it's almost like it's sort of on fire. So 4 quite amazing wines, 4 quite beautiful names, and of course there's the botanical drawings of Patricia Curtin that decorate those labels. So that was our reason for going to Pyrmaid, and we spent 3 years talking to Mike and Claudia about the possibility to purchase it, and Brian Sheth, my partner, absolutely fell in love with the place. Not just to the beauty of it, but fell in love with the wines, fell in love with fell in love with everything about the place. And for us, they'd only planted 2.2 hectares of a property that's 88 hectares in size, and of which there's probably potential for up to 20 hectares of really brilliant vineyard. So it was a great privilege for us to take the best of what they've done over the 20 years of their time on the property, and for us to be able to put our sort of slant on it. So one of the slants that we took quite early on actually was why can't we make the story of Pyrmaid Valley more about the story of North Canterbury? That's where our home is. The Waikari property is in heartland North Canterbury, on these limestone soils, making these high-end, really expressive wines. But why couldn't we make the story of Pyrmaid Valley actually very much about the story of North Canterbury? And of course, a lot of the North Canterbury region is based around the Waipara district, which is a little bit, it's about 15 to 20 minutes drive from the Waikari property at lower altitude. So you're talking at altitudes anywhere from 300 feet to maybe 500 feet altitude, so much lower. And so some of the soils have got these calcium based clay soils on the hills, and then on the flat lands, on the terraces of the rivers, these sort of gravelly soils, which different parts of it have different amount of gravel and different topsoil mixed in with them. But certainly the Waipara region, some fantastic producers in that region, Black Estate, Pegasus Bay, to name a couple. And so for us, it was like, could we find some sources of grapes for us that would allow us to express not only the story of Pyrmaid Valley, but the story of North Canterbury. And I'd have to say we feel very, very welcomed into the region by the local producers, and they were very instrumental in us being able to find some great little parcels of Pinot, great little parcels of Chardonnay, great little parcels of Sauvignon Blanc. And so I really want to say a big thanks to the producers that are there. They've been very welcoming and given us some fantastic fruit to start with. So what we've done at Pyrmaid is the Growers Collection wines, which were what Mike and Claudia made. Interestingly enough, they didn't make anything from North Canterbury. Those wines came from Central Otago, Marlborough, Hawke's Bay, all over the place. We decided that we would discontinue a lot of those wines and really focus what we do at Pyrmaid on Sauvignon Blanc, on Pinot Noir, and on Chardonnay, mostly from North Canterbury. And for those of you that followed some of the other Pyrmaid wines, particularly the more natural wines, such as the orange wine, don't be disappointed. We're still making an orange wine, but moved it from its North Canterbury home from its Marlborough home originally to North Canterbury. So made from Pinot Gris and Muscat and Gewürztraminer. So our first of those wines was in 2018 as well. So we haven't left that behind. In fact, one of the things we haven't left behind is the idea of nature being very much in charge in the way that we make the wine. So, we don't add yeast, we don't add malolactic bacteria, we don't add any enzymes or tannin or all of the multitude of things that you're allowed to add to wine. We just don't believe in that at Pyrmaid. And we use really minimal amounts of sulfur towards the end of the process to make sure that the wines are protected enough to be able to be sent all over the world, and have got a nice life in front of them. And much of the sulfur story there is very, very close to what you'd expect in amongst the natural wine movement anyway. So, there hasn't been, people often thought, well, what are these guys going to do with such a great story of Pyrmaid? Well, actually, we haven't done a lot at all in terms of changing things. I guess what we've done is put our real attention to detail into this. We've managed to get some great winemaking equipment. Brian's bought us a new press, some new distemmers, sorting tables, all of those things that you need, some beautiful little oak cuves to make Pinot. So Mike and Claudia weren't able to do that. We were able to do it. So we've just given ourselves more resources to be able to have more attention to detail with the wines. But in terms of the philosophy, there's almost no change from what Mike and Claudia did. So the new wines are very much a reflection of our sort of look at it. And one of the things we didn't want to lose in doing this is we needed to tidy up the packaging a little bit for Pyrmaid. And one of the things we didn't want to do is lose what was there before. So some of you may have some of the new label in front of you, but this is the new Pyrmaid label. And for those of you that have known Pyrmaid in the past, you might recognise the botanical drawing. Again, a Patricia Curtin part of that drawing that was on the grower collection labels, but it's only a small segment of it, which we wanted to make it a little cleaner, a little more simpler, but we didn't want to lose the heritage. So you can see that.
Wasn't there something about the other label that was slightly wrong?
Yeah, the other big problem, so my viticultural science thing coming back in, is that there was parts of that other botanical drawing that were botanically incorrect. So there's no way I could have that sitting on the label. So I found a part of that label that I knew was correct botanically, and this is a little leaf and shoot of a grapevine, and then the little thing sticking up to the left is an early flowering floret that will turn into bunches of grapes. So yeah, we had to make sure it was accurate. So that's the new look label for Pyrmaid. And then the other thing that we found, again in classic sort of Michael Claudia fashion, is that the branding side of things wasn't really high up in their thing, and what they didn't have was a little logo. So we spent quite a bit of time looking around the area. If we were to have a logo for Pyrmaid Valley, what story would the logo tell? So there's no point having a logo unless it tells a genuine story about the brand and the place. And so within the area, it's got a very strong Maori history, and that Maori history is quite unique because many of Maori in that area actually lived in limestone caves, because limestone wasn't present in most other parts of New Zealand. Is that this is one of the very few areas in New Zealand where Maori lived in the limestone caves, and within those caves there's a lot of cave drawings. And so what we thought we would do is take that idea, so that's an idea that's very close to us, and actually think about what we have, which is limestone and clay. And so with the little logo here, see if I can get it for you to see. So there's the top of the capsule, and you'll see that logo in the middle is a sort of oval circle with some symbols in it. So that is the symbols for limestone, the alchemy symbols for limestone and clay, actually made into one symbol together, and it's done in the art fashion as if it was a little Maori cave drawing. So you find that on the capsule of all of the wines, and then on the label for the appellation wines, it's very hard to see. It's just a little watermark that you'll see in one part of the label, and it plays a much stronger part on the botanical collection wines, because of course those wines all come from that property. So we've kept as much of the heritage as we can. And we're just really excited about the opportunity to take this jewel of a property, this jewel of a brand, and with Brian's help and his investment and support, actually, live the dream in terms of making sure that these wines deserve to be on the same table as some of the great wines of the world. We certainly think we have a great opportunity to do that. We've got a great team of people. Hugh Kinch from Escarpment. He's an Australian, so we'll forgive him for that. But he showed very good taste in making sure he married a young Maori woman from New Zealand. So that's fantastic. And so they've got 3 kids. They live on the property. They also took part in this particular vintage. It was the only staff we had. So Hugh's 3-year-old and 1.5-year-old and 5-year-old all played a part in vintage. But he's excited about it, and a great guy to have on that property. And his sort of partner in crime in the winemaking and viticulture side is Nick Paulin. Nick looks after the Pyrmaid Valley property in Central Otago called Manata Estate, and he's a biodynamic viticultural specialist. So Hugh is the winemaking guy, Nick is the viticultural guy. I'm sort of the conductor. That's my role in the whole thing. And those 2 people, young Kiwis in their 30s, doing a fantastic job. So that they're as much part of this story as we are. We should try some wine now. I think we've been talking for a bit longer.
Totally. I told them to start trying anyway because I thought they might be first.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So one of the sort of things I love about New Zealand and an opportunity is the Sauvignon Blanc story nearly always happens to be cemented around Marlborough. And we make a small amount of Marlborough Sauvignon under Pyrmaid. But part of the story that we really want to tell is the opportunity to tell a story of North Canterbury Sauvignon. It is the most widely planted grape variety in North Canterbury, but most of it gets sent up to Marlborough to be used as a minor blending component in Marlborough wines, which I think is a great tragedy. So for us, we thought, well, why couldn't we make some North Canterbury Sauvignon? So again, thanks to a couple of these grapes come from other winemakers' properties, so we're very grateful to them. We found 2 parcels, one growing on the clay limestoney soils, which are in the Waipara area facing to the northwest, so the classic Waipara soils, and then a small amount from the Glasnevin gravel soils, a property that is very close to the hills, but actually quite warm, quite windy, but soils that are a bit more like what you'd find in Marlborough. So two properties, and what we really wanted to do is what could we do that reflected another story of New Zealand Sauvignon. So, well, we thought we've got 2 properties. We can make these wines a little bit different. So one of the parcels of this wine was a skin ferment Sauvignon, so a small parcel of it. And also, why limit ourselves to just having Sauvignon Blanc as the variety? And let's celebrate some of the other varieties that are the white varieties that are in North Canterbury, being Riesling and Pinot Gris. So that was the sort of idea that we went into the 2019 vintage with. We made a small amount in 2018 that we didn't bottle because we realized to do what we wanted to do, we needed to have total control over the vineyards. So we had total control over the vineyards in 2019. Hugh was resident in site. He'd never made Sauvignon before, but he was excited to do something different. And that's what we did here. So blend of 2 properties, the majority from the clay slopes of Waipara. One of the things that's important for us at Pyrmaid is that the wines are just made with the yeasts that you find in the air around you. They're not so an overriding principle is from certainly the time that we've taken part is that every one of our wines can only use the ambient yeasts. So no inoculated yeasts. Some of the wine was made at the winery where the grapes came from, and some of the wine was brought to the Waikari property and made by Hugh in barrel. So it's we sort of didn't know where we were going with this at the start, but we developed the idea as we went along, and we are absolutely stoked, to use a good Kiwi phrase, with the result. When you smell it, it doesn't smell like it's.
So you explain the plus.
Oh, the plus, yeah, sorry. So you'll see on the label. Is that it's called Sauvignon Blanc, but it's got Sauvignon Plus. The reason the plus is there is because it's something different, it's something extra. And the extra bits are the time and effort that goes into making it, the use of skin ferment Sauvignon Blanc, and also the freedom to use some Pinot Gris or Riesling in the blend if we feel like it adds to it. You know, Pinot Gris has lower acidity, so you can naturally lower the acidity by having some Pinot Gris. Riesling has got a very tight structure and very aromatic, so you can get these wonderful perfume from Riesling. So we wanted to be totally open with the idea that this is Sauvignon, but it's sort of Sauvignon not as you know it, because we play around with these other little components.
But what are you looking for in Sauvignon, Steve?
I sort of like have a saying. I mean, it's easy to make New Zealand Sauvignon that's really flavoursome, really aromatic, got lots of freshness and all of that sort of stuff. But where is the sort of Sauvignon for grown-ups? So when you're looking for something that's sort of serious, and I keep asking myself the question is, where is the Dagenham of New Zealand? So where are those people that are stretching the boundaries with Sauvignon and actually making sure it's truly a fine wine, not just a great glass of flavoursome, aromatic New Zealand Sauvignon. So I'm looking for something that doesn't smell really strong. I mean, I could smell this, and I would, in a blind tasting, probably not pick New Zealand, but I'd certainly pick a place where Sauvignon grows well. So I'd probably head more towards the Loire with this. It's not capsicum-y or pyrazine or passion fruity. It's got lots of sort of interesting, obviously sort of savoury characters rather than fruity.
And it's got a great texture too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and this, I mean, people talk about how wine smells and how wine tastes and all that sort of stuff, but actually the most important thing for wine for me is how it feels. So the wine has to feel like it's got something to it, a lasting impression on your palate, and it'll be the texture and feel of the wine that leaves the lasting impressions on your brain and makes you want to go back to it. So. Lovely sort of briny feel. The good thing about it is it's got that lovely sort of, almost sort of savoury salinity, refreshing finish on the palate, which is, I mean, you just feel like some oysters or fresh seafood or something like that. I mean, it just feels crying out for something with that sort of similar brininess. And it's a sort of, it's definitely a characteristic that you see through all of the Pyrmaid wines, is this sort of sense of savoury, briny, salty sort of feel to the wine. You can still taste it. And the beautiful thing now is we're starting to get some of the lovely sort of sweet nectarine, almost mandarin-like fruit around it, which gives it, you know, a feeling of richness and deliciousness, which sort of would give it away as being from a New Zealand home rather than the Loire home. From a winemaking point of view, as I said, these grapes are handpicked. Most of them are handpicked and fermented. Some fermented in a stainless steel vat and with wild yeasts. Others back in old barrels back at Pyrmaid. And I need to check with this, but I think the skin ferment was done in amphora.
It was done in amphora.
Yeah, yeah. So that there's the amphora part of it, which is going back to the real traditional thing, and Mike and Claudia used to use that for their Chardonnays, but we're using it for the skin ferment orange wine or the parcels of this wine. Wine stays on lees. There would have been a small amount of malolactic fermentation just to get the balance from an acidity point of view, and bottled, not bottled like 3 months after harvest, spends 6 or 7 months in barrel or in tank, just getting itself all naturally settled up.
So there's a question here, Steve, that texture that we've been talking about in this wine, how does it feel? How do we accentuate that? How is it that we've been able to get it? Is it in the grapes, or is it in the winemaking? Is it how?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So
well done, Jeff. It's your question.
It's a great question. So one of the, it's really hard to do that if you don't handpick grapes to start with, because if you machine pick and then you get some skin contact and then you press the grapes quite hard in a press, you end up extracting some of the phenolics from the skins. And those phenolics can be quite bitter, so they have to be covered up with some, stopping the fermentation at a certain stage so that it covers up that sort of slight bitterness. The beauty about whole bunch pressing and hand picking is that you've just got that sort of really pristine juice, and you haven't extracted the bitter phenolics from the skins. You've extracted the phenolics that are nice and savoury or saline-y. So I think that's a really, really big part of it. I think using natural yeasts is a really big deal. And then not like a lot of winemakers do with making high-end Sauvignons, using a lot of oak to cover that up. I mean, it's just, we just want neutral flavour and or neutral impact of oak. So it's just a vessel really. And then having time on lees without sulphur is really, really important, because the sulphur is the natural stabilizer. Sorry, the lees are the natural stabilizer of the wine. If you put sulphur with it, it stops that natural stabilizing process. So by having the lees in contact with the wine, using the lees to scavenge oxygen instead of using sulphur, and then of course as the lees start to break down, you start getting some of that sort of nutty character, and also it gives it a little bit more richness on the palate. So yeah, I think there's a whole lot of little things to add up to it, but you've got to have grapes that are able to do that. And the thing I love about this wine is that that texture is able to shine because the fruit flavors are actually quite discreet and quite integrated and not too obvious.
There was another comment here from Prue, just before we go off the wine, off the labels in the wine, that she loved the natural, simple look of it. Which I thought
Of the label?
Of the label, which was basically the clean, natural, botanical look of the brand.
Yeah,
pretty much sums things up.
Yeah, I mean I think it feels, the new label feels like it's a bit more modern to me. And I know when we were doing it, we sort of wanted to feel like it could sit by itself, and if it was on a wall, just that simple little label in a wall in a frame, it could look like its almost own piece of art. So yeah, we loved it, and I'm pleased you like it too. So, and of course the colours are, again, what we've done with the colours of the main colours for Pyrmaid now, which is this sort of lovely earthy, sort of dark, almost olivey earth colour, is the colour of the capsule, and then the bronze colour for the logo and the type, again very close to the earth in terms of the way that we look at it, but not in an old-fashioned way. And I guess that's what we're trying to do, is that, in fact, probably doing things naturally and in line with nature is as modern as you can get these days, but we certainly didn't want to be old-fashioned in our approach to it. So that's the way the brand looks. Okay, so I hope you like the Sauvignon. That's from the 2019 vintage. It was just released earlier this year, and I think it's going to hang around and taste fantastic for the next 2 to 4 years. So it's not one of those Sauvignons that you think you have to rush off and drink really quickly. Okay, let's move to the 2018 North Canterbury Chardonnay. First time that, again, that Sauvignon is the very first Sauvignon Blanc that Pyrmaid has made. They've made Semillon before from Marlborough, but never a Sauvignon. So it's nice to show that the North Canterbury story and all that sort of stuff. Moving on to Chardonnay. Again, Pyrmaid has never made a North Canterbury Chardonnay outside its own wine. So we were able to find a small property in the Mackenzie's Road area of Waipara, which is to the west of State Highway 1, but in these very stony soils that are along the banks of the Waipara River. So we managed to find this property. It's really hard finding great Chardonnay in fact, any Chardonnay in North Canterbury. Again, it's like a little jewel. It's only recently, I think, that the winemakers, even though Pegasus Bay and Black Estate and those two particularly, of course with Pyrmaid and Bell Hill, been making Chardonnay from North Canterbury for a long time. There's not a lot of it planted. And so we were lucky to find this parcel halfway through the year. Sorry? Yeah, it's not very much, yeah. Yeah, so this was this small parcel on these really gravelly soils, so we only made a few hundred cases of this wine. It is, so again, we're just on a little journey with this wine in terms of what we do. Again, we want to follow the same philosophy, is let the region show, let the variety show, let's not be too interfering, but also make sure we put our own stamp on it in terms of what we want to see. And the coolness of the place, leans you towards the famous cool areas of the world. And the one thing you'll notice is that it does not have the really strong, punchy, nectarine, citrus fruit characters that you find from Marlborough or even Central Otago. Now, I don't know why, but it just seems that in North Canterbury, these fruit characters are a little bit more in the background, which I actually sort of quite like. Winemaking wise, just classic Chardonnay winemaking, hand-picked, mostly whole bunch pressed, but part of it was actually also foot stomped. So you put the bunches in the press, and then you or in a bin, and you foot stomp them to give them a little bit of crushing to get some of the characters from close to the skins a little bit further out before you press it. Winemaking here in old barrels. There might have been one new barrel, I'm not sure, but certainly there's no reason to have new oak in this. Very long fermentation, so almost a year to ferment, and full malolactic fermentation, long time on lees and barrel, and then bottled a little over 12 months from vintage. So again, very low use of sulfur. But part of the reason for the goldenness of the color, which I sort of like, it's almost like a really lovely sort of yellowish straw color, is one, these really stony soils and quite exposed grapes, so you end up with some color coming from those grapes, and also those very long fermentations as a result of the natural yeast that make it, that sort of always lean towards a little bit more color.
Define North Canterbury Chardonnay compared to Chardonnay of other regions. Your definition.
I don't think there is a definition yet. I really don't think there is. I think you've obviously got some fantastic, I mean, 4 fantastic producers, I think. Pyrmaid, Pegasus Bay, Bell Hill, and Black Estate do a fantastic job with Chardonnay and have done for some time. And in fact, from the 2019 vintage onwards, we've been able to source some Chardonnay from probably the oldest Chardonnay vineyard in New Zealand, which is an almost, I think it's about 35 or nearly 40-year-old Chardonnay property or Chardonnay vineyard on its own roots. So without it grafted vines, one of the original vineyards at Waipara. And so it's, so that's been exciting as well, because this is just extending the story. But I think it's sort of, if I look at all of the great North Canterbury wines, to me, the really great ones are all about this texture. So they're not overly flavoursome. They're really interesting wines. But this has not got a lot of obvious character, this wine, but you see lots of little characters in it, which make it really, really interesting. And
that's yours. I think they've also got a really good vibrancy to them, haven't they? Really, really lively.
Yeah, there's an energy to them.
Yeah,
I mean, I think there's when you go to the region, there's a rawness to the region. There's no doubt about that. You know, the sea there is really bloody cold. The sunshine's got a bristling sort of feel to it. And, you know, I've sort of almost been the coldest I've ever been in January has almost been when I was there on a day in January last year. So, so there's definitely a fresh. So I mean, you sort of lean towards the wines of Chablis. Yeah. So you sort of lean towards that.
Yeah.
But it's sort of got its own sort of stamp of it, really.
A little bit more generous in the fruit.
Yeah, I mean, the New Zealand wines will always be like that, right? I mean, because of, you know, we're a unique place, this island nation in the middle of a temperate ocean. Miles away from anyone else, and there's latitudes from 35 to 45. I mean, it's like nirvana for wine.
Hey, Mike makes a question. He wants to know whether that ferment, that long ferment that we do down there is by design, or just because of the fact that it gets so cold during winter, fermentation stops and then it starts again, or how does it work?
Long fermentations are never by design, no matter what you say. From a winemaking person, is that, I mean, the ideal winemaking thing is that your fermentation is finished as quick as possible, so you can then not worry about the wine. But actually, the greatest wines are made where fermentation can sometimes last. I mean, I think this one lasting, you know, right up to a year is probably a little bit too long. But you've just got to look after it. You know, it's a natural process. You know, if it needs some warming up, if it needs a little bit of oxygen, if it needs some stirring, if it needs, you know, sometimes the guys take the barrels outside and get some sun on the barrels to get the energy from the sun. All of these things.
Because this wouldn't have lasted a year. This would have been just the fact that it would have gone into hibernation during the winter and then started again.
Yeah, and it is.
So the room is that. That's what the room is.
Yeah, it gets cool. It's hard to keep it warm, that's for sure. And then, yeah, the fact is that you have sugar rest over the winter. It doesn't totally stop over winter.
No.
It tends to tick a little bit, but then you've just got to get it, you know, going again. And yeast doesn't like alcohol, believe it or not. So if you've got a fermentation that's, you know, 12% alcohol and there's still 0.5% or 1% of alcohol to go, the yeast actually struggle through that. So if the yeast population really drops away towards the end, you've then got to sort of build it up again when it warms up. So, you know, that's what I say. It's, you know, there's a lot of human impact in these wines, but it's not intervention. It's just love, really. You've just got to be, you're really close to it and help the wine as much as possible just by using warmth or oxygen or lees or, or
Sounds like
just some,
on life study.
or music.
Love and music.
Exactly.
And hugs. And
Yeah, well, you do. You can't if you're, yeah, you've got to, yeah. And I guess it's really, for me, it's like, in my winemaking or wine career, I guess it's like, it's now you feel confident in doing that because you know if you look after them, they're going to get there. But when you're young, there's too much to play, so you tend to push it a little bit hard. Although the young people today tend to be the most outrageous in terms of what they want to do. So I think we've got an amazing generation of young New Zealand winemakers coming through who've got no fear. Hopefully, we've been able to play a part in providing a base for that is an understanding of what happens. But there's certainly some bravery there, and I think we're moving into an amazing generation of young Kiwi winemakers, and we're lucky to have.
It's the next generation, isn't it?
It is the next generation. Yeah, it'll be the first generation of often second generation young New Zealanders where their parents have been like me. When we started, we were way new to wine. So there's these young people now that have been kids of winemaking families or known winemaking families, or been brought up with wine as kids, have now grown into and now got some amazing opportunities. And those of us that are a little older, we want to feel we're younger. We just surround ourselves by these people. I mean, we've got two great young interns on our property. Two great young women, one in Central Otago, one in Waikari, who are going to be part of that. Hugh and Nick are only in their early to mid 30s, so it's fantastic. Right, last wine. North Canterbury Pinot from 2018. Here's the interesting thing about Pinot Noir as a grape variety, as a red grape variety. It is the one red grape variety that you never judge by its colour, because some of the greatest Pinot Noirs I've tried in the world, mostly out of Burgundy, have had this relatively pale colour. So that is part of its charm, in that you can make great Pinot, and in fact, some the greatest Pinots are wines that are relatively light in colour. So we don't worry about colour so much with Pinot. This is our first harvest of Pinot, again, some of it from those very stony soils where the Chardonnay comes from, but also a couple of nice parcels on the hills, one facing west, again from another winemaker's property who has given us some fantastic grapes, and one of the warmer sites, and then another actually one of the very few vineyards in Waipara that is on the eastern slopes of the hills facing northeast rather than facing northwest, so it gets the morning sun and is a little bit more sheltered from the wind. So that was the deck of cards that we had, and this was the first year that we had the oak coups at Pyrmaid, so we had some nice temperature control, a really great opportunity for us to see what North Canterbury was going to do for us. So when you smell it again, discreet, lovely, savoury, almost like a cranberry character. Often when I say cranberry, it doesn't seem like the right sort of term, but it is definitely savoury and red fruited. It's got a lovely, and it's got a lovely, almost like a Baronia type smell to it. I mean, Pinot Noir should have a lot of floral characters in it. If it's dominated by cherries or dominated by thyme, it has to have floral character to be good in my book anyway.
So it's quite crunchy, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is where your Burgundy side of your thing comes back. So this is not classic New World Pinot or even New Zealand Pinot, as you like, because it's crunchy and savoury and almost like it got a grittiness to it, it's this beautifully sort of spelt start to the palate, and then you've got this gritty sort of serious muscular thing happening, but not muscle because of big tannins or a lot of oak. Muscle, and I'm not sure where that gritty feel comes from, but to me it's a really attractive part of the wine. And again, you taste it for quite a while. It's not a big strong flavour to finish with, but you keep tasting it. And the great thing about these sort of wines, when you've got the grittiness and this texture again, this feel of it, you throw a little bit of protein with that, and all of a sudden that grittiness sort of melts away, and it becomes, you know, part of that experience. So it's I think it's a great little wine for us to start our Pinot story from North Canterbury, and in 2019 and 2020 we've sort of reinforced that. We just had an amazing vintage in 2020 in North Canterbury, just absolutely brilliant. I was in lockdown in Hawke's Bay, so couldn't get down to help you out. He was probably really happy about that, actually. But he did an amazing job, and it really is a spectacular vintage. So the journey of these wines, this 18 Pinot and the Chardonnay and the Sauvignon, you'll see them as they evolve. But certainly what we've started with in 2018 for the Chardonnay and Pinot, and the 19 with the Sauvignon, we've built on with the following generation, following vintages.
So a couple of questions here. Why does Pinot lose its colour? Why is Pinot a lighter in colour? Why does it lose its colour? And the second question is around cellaring potential for this Pinot.
Okay, so colour. So the simple reason why Pinots are lighter in colour is that they're natural anthocyanins that are in the grapes themselves. So red wine, all the colour comes from the skin. Red wine grapes, the juice is white. All of the colour comes from the skin. So Pinot Noir is a naturally thin-skinned grape variety, and because of that, ends up with colours that are naturally lower anyway. So that's the first starting point. The second thing is Pinot Noir is very, very sensitive to heat, and often if you get Pinot Noir growing in very warm climates, is that colour is very unstable and disappears anyway. So that's the natural thing is you've got natural colours that are always lighter than the Syrahs or the Cabernets or the Merlots, because the grapes are like that. And also when you're making Pinot, one thing we've learned as New Zealand winemakers over the last 20 years or so is if you try too hard to extract all of the phenolics and all the anthocyanins from the skins, you end up with a wine that's too tough. So it might be nice and dark and nice and black, and have lots of character, but the tannins and the structure of it are a bit tense and a bit and a bit almost some bitterness that can be covered up by alcohol, but over time it means the wine doesn't age. So we naturally step back on the extraction techniques that we use to extract that colour when you're making Pinot Noir, because we know if you push it too hard, you'll end up with a wine that doesn't have the grace and beauty and feel of your wine. And as we know, you don't have to have dark coloured Pinot to make great Pinot. And the last one was aging. Cellaring potential. Oh, well, I could probably suggest that it'll probably won't last long enough in your cellar to get to its full aging potential. Because I just think it tastes delicious now. I wouldn't say this is a long living Pinot. I think it's probably a 5 to 8 year from vintage window. But again, we don't know. And the most important thing about wine, a lot of things about wine, is that often we age wines too long. And my only recommendation is that if you love the wine now, is to buy 2 bottles or 6 bottles or 12 bottles and drink one every 6 months, every year or whatever. And when you get to a point where you love it, drink the rest. Nothing else matters.
What do you think though with this wine with cellaring? It's got some really interesting sort of quite different characters to Pinot. What's going to happen to that versus something that's big, more fruity?
Well, yeah, I mean, so obviously this is the tannins in this are relatively light. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing, if you look at some of the Pyrmaid home block wines, similarly, you've got tannins that are relatively light. They have quite strong acidity, so that allows it to age quite well. Look, I really don't know. I know it's not going to fall over tomorrow, and that's why I say if you're talking a window of 5 to 8 years from vintage, so you're talking, 2023 to 2026, that sort of time frame, I think it'll be great. But what is it going to do over that time? I don't know.
And so what about the Chardonnay? And I guess it all comes down to personal preference, doesn't it? Because what you like in your cellar wines and what you like in the wine for the shop. the Chardonnay as well was a question here. Growing potential for Chardonnay.
Yeah, it's a good question. New Zealand Chardonnays tend
Why you're
to.
the master of wine, mate.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure whether I know the answer though. But I think Chardonnays in New Zealand, now that the way that we're making them now, and certainly the high-end Chardonnays, such as these, sealed under screw cap, the aging potential of them is fantastic, and we sort of underestimate that, particularly with Chardonnays. I'd actually suggest probably that the Chardonnay might be a lot more longer keeper than the Pinot. I just drank a 2007 Craigie Le Beau Caillou Chardonnay over Christmas. You know, Brian was here and he always brings a bunch of great Burgundy with him, including some Sauzet and Montrachet, and that was from 2009. And Le Beau Caillou just killed it. You know, that's a 13-year-old bottle of New Zealand Chardonnay still tasting amazing. So I think our Chardonnay's got real longevity, particularly the high-end ones and those that have got a history of keeping, such as Kumeu River, such as the Felton Road wines, such as the Akarangi wines, the Pyrmaid, some of the early Pyrmaid wines from 2006, that first vintage. Tried one of those when we bought the property and it tasted great. So, yeah, find the Chardonnay producers that you love, and you could be braver with your selling of those if you wish. Okay, so that's the story of the Pyrmaid Valley appellation wines. That's certainly the story of 3 of them. There are 3 other wines in the appellation collection. I've talked about one before, which is the orange wine. And so our rules around making orange wine is making sure that it's got no obvious faults and it's delicious. So that's the simple rule there. And Hugh and his team are very keen about making sure that wine delivers that sort of approach. We also have, so when we bought the Pyrmaid Valley North Canterbury property, we wanted a central Otago home for Pyrmaid Valley to make Pinot Noir, and that is the Logan Ferry property we purchased, which has got some established vines on it, but also so again some nice parcels of land to plant. So we, from 2017, have made a central Otago Pinot from this property, the Logan Ferry property, that's been renamed Manata Estate. Again, a great Maori legend behind that name. And so that wine and to come from that property will be a botanical collections Pinot Noir when we work out which part of the vineyard's right for it. That hopefully we can make for the first time in 2021, and to sit alongside it smoke and angel flower. So we have a pretty cool name for that as well. I'm not going to tell you now. And then the last wine in the portfolio is one that I guess personally have sort of driven a love for, and that is answering the question, where is the Dagenham of New Zealand? And no one's really going there. So we found one of the rules for Pyrmaid, it has to be organic or biodynamic, ideally biodynamic. So we found a fantastic property, Sam and Mandy Weaver's Churton Vineyard on the hills above the Waihopai in Tiddersfield in Marlborough. Grow some fantastic Sauvignons. So we made the first wines from that property in 2018 from this great vineyard. And here's the cool thing: we fermented part of it in Marlborough for the Smith and Chef Cru Sauvignon, and
Machine pick stuff, yeah.
that was the machine pick part of it, and the hand pick part of it went to actually some hand pick went to the Marlborough winery that year. So we sent some to Pyrmaid, and so there was 2 hand pick lots, one to the Marlborough winery, one to the Waikari property, both fermented with the ambient yeast that you find in the winery. And the difference in the ambient yeast at Pyrmaid and the character of the wine was remarkable. Totally different wines, and entirely due to obviously these cool bugs that you find in a property that's been biodynamically farmed as a vineyard for 20 years, and no introduced yeasts at all ever been on that property. So So that is a Marlborough Sauvignon, that first wine we made from 2018, which I absolutely love. Only 150 odd cases, but that makes up the last member of the Appellation Collection wine. So we don't see any additions to that.
So there's a question here from, do we have long-term contracts with the suppliers for the Appellation wines, or will you consider other vineyards over time?
So you can have contracts if you like, but it's actually about relationships. We have as I said, the North Canterbury community, winemaking community, have been very open-armed with us, which we love, and I suspect those relationships will last for some time. So I'd like to think that we had a long-term relationship with all of these people, because we continue to help tell the story of the region, and but we need to be open about if a great vineyard comes up that we may be able to purchase, or as we step our foot into it a little bit further, we'll make those decisions over time. But certainly at the moment, those wines are all made from the same combination of vineyards we had at the start.
All right, well, I think
okay, that's
questions coming through. Anyone else? Last chance for a question, everyone. I think
all right, we've used up 50 minutes of your time, so I hope you enjoyed the tasting. For those of you that have been acquainted with Pyrmaid for a long time, I hope you get a sense that we're taking the idea and philosophy and vision that Mike and Claudia had, and putting our own little stamp onto it, but growing it and giving it a real place in the fine wine story of New Zealand. So I hope you've enjoyed it. For those that are new to Pyrmaid, I hope you enjoyed the wines. And you're going to see some wonderful wines from 2020 when we get a chance to release those as well. So again, thanks very much, and we'll catch up again soon. Thanks.